Dear guests of the second panel, Investment in Energy Transition and Infrastructure for Healthy Environment and European Future, we'll be discussing about energy transition, environment, as well as the accomplished and envisaged capital investment in healthy environment. I'm inviting the panelists and the moderator to take their seats. I invite Mr. Minister of Economy, Mr. Krešnik Bekneši, Ms. Minister of Environment Kaja Šikova, the Director of Investment in ESM, Slavjanka Consultant for Environment, and this panel will be moderated by Mr. Mirce Jovanovski. You may take the floor.
Treba da pritiskam.
Good day to you all. Dear government representatives, ministers, dear attendees, I'm glad that there are people following us over the internet. This is the panel Investments in Energy Transition and Infrastructure for Healthy Environment and European Future within the annual conference, A Year of European Opportunities. Last year, more or less at the same time, during the first conference, we also had the opportunity to discuss the energy sector, where the focus was the topic of North Macedonia as energy green hub, how to transform crisis into an opportunity and make sure we have energy safety and security and speeded economic growth and development. As you may notice, this focus is more on investments to green energy and impact on the environment. And you will agree that what is most difficult, not only in the energy sector and economy, we need to think about what comes next, which is ruling out traditional fossil fuels. And the challenges are still here. Some of them are old ones, such as the Ukraine war. Some of them are novel ones, such as the crisis in the Red Sea. Also, in the previous period, we had an extremely conference of the United Nations, important conference held in the United Arab Emirates, committed to climate change, the Paris Climate Agreement, EU member states that ratified it and signed it, and they are committed to its implementation. Macedonia, as an aspiring country for the EU membership, is sharing the same values and ambitions. So more or less, this is the framework of the panel. Let me once again introduce the participants. The Minister of Economy, Mr. Krešnik Bekneši, the Minister of Environment and Physical Planning, Ms. Kaja Šukova, the Director of Development and Investment in ESM, Viktor Andonov, and the Environmental Consultant, Slavjanka Pečinovska-Andonova. We'll get started with the first round of questions. Mr. Bekneši, recently during the UN Conference on Climate Change, you presented the investment platform for just energy transition. Could you say a few more words about this platform? Last year, I mentioned that one of the topics was Macedonia as an energy hub. The key projects are the interconnector with Greece, gas terminal with Alexandropoli, connection with Serbia at some future point in time. You may take the floor. Thank you, Mirce. First of all, greetings to all the attendees and the ones viewing us over social media. It's indeed good to speak directly about the transition performed in our country and all the efforts made so far, not including only the Ministry of Economy, but also the other institutions that need to be listed, which have great influence and contribute to the transformation of the energy sector in our country, starting from the ESM, MIPSOM, MEMO, my colleagues from the environment, transportation and agriculture, to make this transition as speedy as possible. As to the plan presented by us, together with Minister Shukova, input was given by these institutions, and we presented it as the policy makers to implement that plan, and a number of segments are envisaged therein. First of all, an investment in the area of infrastructure and connections with all the neighboring countries, internal transformation of our facilities and capacities to move from the conventional energy production to green energy production, which is an investment underway, but it's going to be an additional encouragement for us to implement those projects as soon as possible. In terms of fossil fuels, although natural gas is envisaged, though it doesn't cover the green sources of energy, renewable energy sources. We've negotiated with the EU and managed to exceed the timeline to 2040, with the only goal to be able to re-aim our blocks in Rek Bitel and Rek Oslomen, as well as the Sinegotinov, from coal-made energy to the natural gas-made energy. After decades, we are starting the construction of the new interconnector. In addition to the transition, the new interconnector will ensure security for energy supply, but also generally for the country, bearing in mind that up until now we have been fully independent on one entry point in the supply with natural gas, which was the entry point with the Republic of Bulgaria, which was leased by Gazprom by 2030 with Noma Gas, with the former advisor to Prime Minister Zaev and Kovachevsky. We negotiated and managed during the crisis to ensure additional capacity of that gas pipeline to supply gas to our heating companies, including some other sources of energy from our strategic partners, including the United States and other countries, not to be completely dependent on Russia and the ones supporting the Russian Federation. And therefore, this year is very important in our country. Since the independence up until now, we are getting completely independent on the eastern part in the energy sector, especially the natural gas supply. And we are also in the final stage of putting into operation of the product pipeline. There is a difference between the oil pipeline, but product pipeline is another story. It has never been put into operation because it was suspended by Okta refinery, and the technical specifications and the manner in which it was built was to transport crude oil that will be refined in our country, while making the Republic of North Macedonia becoming a hub for oil supply for Kosovo and Serbia and other neighboring countries. And through the latest modifications to the energy law, a product pipeline has been envisaged, where this pipeline will be used to transport other derivatives, including the diesel that is up to 80% used in Macedonia, Serbia, Kosovo in the area of oil derivatives, thus enabling cheaper derivative for the industry and generally for the older consumers in our country. Through the latest modifications to the energy law, and the ones being underway, where great contribution was given by USAID and our consultants, and I wish to thank them publicly. Two new pieces of legislation are already under preparation. We will have a fully new law on sources of energy where certain investments. Could you say a few words about this law later on? The main message by the Ministry of Economy is that after 1991, up until now, our country has been dependent on the eastern part regarding energy sources. As of this year onwards, we won't be dependent on any country. We'll decide ourselves in line with the principles of competitiveness and additional opportunities regarding the energies, and thus speeding up the integration of our country into the EU, which will enable additional economic benefits for domestic companies in addition to the benefits for citizens. Yes, safety and security, and the direction we've already taken as a country, which is the strengthened strategic partnership with the United States and full integration of our country into the EU. And on top of that, we are extremely successful in connecting with the energy markets with Kosovo and the Republic of Greece through the experts hired by USAID. Thank you very much. In the second round, we'll speak about the law on renewable energy sources. Ms. Minister Shukova, the Paris Agreement obliged the EU member states to become energy neutral by 2050. What is happening with our country? We have pointed out our perspective clearly. We have adequate strategies and policies. What is required to accomplish the goals in the area of environment arising from the global goals from the Paris Agreement, and how much it's going to cost, something about the green and circular economy examples, because it's not cheap at all. Thank you.
What I would like to emphasize at the beginning is that for many years we have been struggling with the fact that we need to recognize the Paris Agreement. I want to underline that it was this government that did so, and we ratified it, thus making it a part of our daily operations, and also allowing for carbon reduction and growth of the country. But we should not forget that if we want to resolve climate changes, we have to do so only with coordinated policies, and this is something that you can see in the work of these governments, because the results that directly influence energy climates like transport, agriculture, and others, these are sectors that have been cooperating with the Ministry of Environment over the past years, and we all together set the goals mostly to reduce the pollution of the environment and climate changes, but also economic growth of the country. We have a long-term climate change strategy. It includes clearly defined goals and measures by which we should achieve these goals. What is important, though, is that we have to invest a lot in these sectors affecting the climate, because not doing so will result in much more costs in the future than the ones required as investments in the present, and are not something that amounts to hundreds of millions of euros. In addition, these investments will create green jobs, and the estimates are that if we implement the strategy consistently, we will generate probably some 10,000 green jobs, which is, of course, a challenge for EU member states, let alone our country. What among other things, needs to be mentioned here is that when we talk about environmental policies, climate is, of course, an integral part of all sub-policies, if you want, because environment is a multidisciplinary field and consists of numerous sectors that also impact the environment. In addition to energy, transport, and agriculture, we also must not forget waste management, as this is another sector that does generate, can and does generate adverse consequences to the climate. We share this policy with all other partners in the government or the other ministries in terms of implementation of short, mid, and long-term goals, both regarding the environment and the other sector policies. I think this should be enough from the beginning. Mr. Antonov, you have long experience as an advisor to the government, and now you occupy a very important position, and that is the director of development investments. The power provider, SMI, with its capacities, is the main provider, and that was evident in 2023. But the energy transition imposes the question of where the place of SMI, the company, is in the future, or if we see new players on the market. Along these lines, the government announced recently that it will find a solution for the thermal power plant Negotino and transform it in the power generation capacities. What will that mean? Thank you for the question. As you say, SMA as a company is part of the energy system in the country and generally of the economy, and it has been so over the past 30 years, but is now facing serious challenges, just as all countries in Europe and in the region. And if we continue with the same habits of not investing, yes, the company will lose its position. But if we only look at the past 2 years, even the Prime Minister said this in his speech, that 600 megawatts were invested from the private sector only in the past 2 years, and that shows that we can maintain the main role, but this should be accompanied with a series of measures supported by the government, of course, because the company itself cannot cope with this, as we are facing serious challenges such as reduced production due to the all this power production capacity at Bitula is already obsolete, and the quality of coal and production of coal is also reduced, and all that leads to problems making the progress and transformation difficult if we face the challenge in 2023 or 25. That would need to close down Oslome in Bitola. That will not only require finances but capacity of the people to go implement this process successfully. The process has been commenced. We, SMA as a company, commenced its transition, and that going along the way that was defined by the government, and we chose this coal mine, and then due to that and due to the cooperation with the international partners, European Investment by the KfW, the German Development Bank, and others, we are currently working on a serious plan to transform the company and the economy. One of the serious motivations and opportunities is exactly the investment plan that you asked the Minister of Finances about. And this plan tells us that we have been given 3 billion euros, not to the company directly, but that it is as a assistance to the households and SMEs. But then we should look at these funds as funds intended to assist the transformation of the power companies. And I think SMEs should have serious roles, because over the last 3-4 decades, these people there were exposed to bad, poor quality air, and this transformation should take special care of these areas in Oslomaya and Bitola, and that is the something we are working on. It's 200 megawatts in Bitola. Not only that, you mentioned that in your question, one of the concepts for replacement of the production in Bitola is the combined gas power plant that should provide both power and heat, because after so many years a heat pipeline is being constructed, and if we close down the Bitola power plant, the heat will no longer be there. So this is an idea, a opportunity, because it can also be used for hydrogen, which is the energy of the future. Gas is transitional, and we cannot build now without seeing what will happen 15 years from now, because there are countries that are currently mixing gas and hydrogen, and thus reducing the CO2 emissions and increasing the efficiency of the power plant. Hydrogen is nowadays used for several applications, but that requires expensive processes, but the increasing investments in renewable energy, especially in Germany. You have a lot of wind power parks. Then this is one of the ways to use them is to produce hydrogen with this power plant, which will then be used in the other industrial or energy processes. One of the development concepts of development of transformation of Bitola, we should look at it now in the next 10 or 15 years as a hybrid power production center, and we have huge areas there which could host 1,000 megawatts plants, and we can store energy. Solar district heating is also a part of the plan, that is the generation of heat with plants, and of course hydrogen plants. So this would also be part of this transformation, and the funds that you mentioned are intended for that. Well, that will be the focus. The second one is thermal power plant in Negotino. Why Negotino? Because at the location of the thermal power plant itself will be the location through which the gas pipeline will go. As the minister said, now with the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, we'll have access to gas from Azerbaijan, and now is the moment to build gas power plant. We had two crises in 2013 and the previous year that directly affected gas. There were prohibitions. Gas was not transported through Russia or Ukraine, but all of this will have impact only if you have one source, and I hope we'll have the second one in the coming 2 years. And as a result of all these projects, that will, in the mid or long term, provide energy stability, and all citizens and all companies rush to seek assistance from the government. But for this to happen in the future, we need to invest. In the past, unfortunately, SMO was more exploited than invested in, and it had other activities added to it instead of being built. And if we want to preserve our economy in the future, we do need investments in new capacities. The company SMO is apparently facing challenges. Mr. Pecino Scandonova, you worked on the report on strategic assessment on the environmental development for accelerated transition from coal in the country. What did the research show? How will the implementation of this plan affect the environment, and what do we need to be cautious about? Yes, me and my team worked on a report on the strategic assessment of the impact of the plan's impact on the environment. That is to say, we analyzed the goals of the plan and the ways in which these goals correspond to the goals of environmental protection and the social aspects in the regions where this plan will be implemented, and that is the southwestern, where the thermal power plant Oslome is, and the one related to BTO. The strategic assessment is a mechanism used in the country for many years now in the attempt to analyze the strategic documents and, in essence, to provide guidance at the very beginning while they are constructed, what aspects need to be taken into account. And of course, in case of confrontation between the environmental goals and goals in the plan, the Ministry of Economy should implement measures ensuring such balance. So let me go into some details. The main point is, while analyzing the goals of the plan and the environmental protection goals in the already adopted plans, we came to the conclusion that we have an abundance of positive impacts of the investment plan for accelerated transition from coal on the environment and the social way of life in these regions and even at a national level through various segments. The first one is that it will result in a 100% reduction of pollution of the air by pollutants coming from these two thermal power plants. Number two, reduces the greenhouse gases that contribute to the climate changes. Following the calculations, we can see that 32% of the greenhouse gases will be reduced by 2050 only with this change of the function of these two thermal power plants, improvement of the air quality, especially in the regions surrounding the thermal power plants, and of course, wider we will bring about improvement. This investment plan will lead to improvement of the soil and groundwater's quality because it includes remediation of the land and the ash deposits. The plan also includes support programs for people that will lose their jobs and their requalification through new skills, finding new jobs, creation of new green businesses, and of course, allowing for development of the agriculture in the vicinity of these two capacities. What is expected? So these were the benefits, and what we should also always take into account when we develop such plans is that guidance is provided in the implementation of this investment plan, and this is primarily for each individual renewable source project, because that is the goal. Opening renewable sources plants, we need to initiate a procedure that will, just like the strategy is applied, that is assessment of the impact of the project. I spoke about a strategic assessment at a higher level in terms of hierarchy, and now we need to do assessment of the impact of each individual project as part of this investment plan in all of the stages of its development, starting from development, construction, and operation, and even after closing, and impact of all these stages on the environment. What was important for us was to provide guidelines as to what needs to be developed as a protective mechanism that includes measures and monitoring of such measures. We, as we're thinking, since the equipment will be dismantled and remediation will take place. For example, when we did such assessment for Ohis, what is very important is that that dismantling process does not result into additional contamination to the environment and employees, and this is why we propose that several plans are developed by each of the participants in the project: dismantling and closure projects, a chemical management plan, which is very important, since if the chemicals are still usable, can be given to other plants to be used in there. If they are no longer usable,
Отпад ќе треба да се како опасен отпад спрема карактеристиките.
they need to be treated as hazardous waste. In other words, to manage chemicals and waste properly, we expect asbestos elements in these facilities, transformation oils containing hazardous chemicals. So the plans should be developed very carefully, and the implementing agency will have to have someone approve that. In the as a company, they have special services working on that, and they will develop that, and then the implementing agency will need to implement those measures to avoid any pollution of the environment. Let me only say that at the end of the analysis, we provided indicators to be monitors in terms of the reduction of the greenhouse gases and of the concentration of pollutants in the air. And in parallel with that, we will need to monitor the goals of the investment plan in terms of its efficiency. And this is the only way in which we can be sure that the strategic assessment will be effective. And even in this initial stage, we need to plan, we must plan how to protect the environment and the local population. So this would be the overall message. In addition to that, and if needed, additional measures should also be introduced so that things run smoothly. Thank you for the exhaustive answer. Mr. Bekteshi, you mentioned the law on renewable sources of energy. It is on the public website, so the public debate has started in a way. Can you tell us more specifically what is included in this plan? Because the energy community insists on adoption of this law on renewable. What does it contain? What elements of it are new, especially when it comes to storing energy? Mr. Andonov mentioned battery systems. Does the law include such plans? And what happens with the surplus of energy resulting from the photovoltaic plants? Because the goal is that energy be used even more efficiently.
Thank you for your question. Precisely, the first public debate under the information I've got has already been held, and certain comments have been received by all stakeholders, including the private sector, and certainly various institutions provided their comments in order to make the content of the renewable energy sources law as good as possible, and the manner of storage of electricity through battery systems. And I think we're going to be the first ones in the region to start with such investments, following the principle of competitiveness, where private companies will be able to make such investments under the electricity projects, and MEPSO can balance in line what they have as an opportunity at that point. As specified by Victor, in our country, currently the balancing, in addition to the hydro block, knowing the capacity thereof, and thermal power plants, we need to have additional alternatives such that the investment boom with the photovoltaic panels to be funded for our needs, and also become an exporting country in the area of energy. And to that end, we are taking strategic steps, especially these institutions, including MEPSO, where the construction of this connector with the Republic of Albania is under construction, and a new interconnection is envisaged with the Republic of Greece from Bitola to Evzoni in the Republic of Greece, so that in the months where we have a surplus of energy generation and not having such consumption like the tourist places in both Greece and Albania that have the need for additional electricity, to be able to meet their needs as well, and certainly thus becoming an exporting country regarding the energy, starting from the month of May until the month of October, where there is an increased consumption in these two countries. Also, the principle of competitiveness covers the construction of photovoltaic power plants and other renewable energy sources plants. The procedure has been envisaged on how they are supposed to be constructed, and we already have success stories from previous models introduced by our experts, and I wish to thank Samir and his team who have worked diligently and showed that their recommendations, suggestions, and experience brought about results in our country, where most of our companies have installed photovoltaic panels on their roofs, thus reducing their costs. And whenever they have power surpluses, by introducing this model, they can provide the surpluses to the distribution network, which is an additional income for those companies. I'd like to take this opportunity for all the stakeholders and interested parties to take part in public debates and hearings and provide their comments to ENER that will be considered by our experts, and certainly the best recommendations will be embraced and proposed to the MPs to be voted in our parliament as soon as possible to continue the trend of investment in the energy sector in our country. One sub-question: yesterday, a decision was made in the government related to agricultural land of first and second category not being transformed into a construction land. Does it relate to the energy generation facilities, maybe photovoltaic power plants? Because we have examples where in agricultural land photovoltaics are installed. So are there any limitations regarding this? Yesterday we had a proposed law by the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Transport and Communications, and I think that it was a good proposal, but the final say will be given by the MPs in our parliament. First category and second category land cannot have photovoltaic power plants except for the possibility for them to play a double role in the area of agriculture and energy and power generation. And with regard to the third and fourth category, the indication plans adopted by the Ministry of Economy and other institutions and the plan for power generation in line with the energy sector development strategy containing opinions by the Ministry of Environment, Agriculture and Economy, such facilities will be able to be constructed. Generally, this is the model, but it's going to be presented during the Commission debates and parliamentary discussions in Parliament, and certainly the other stakeholders will give their views. Minister Shukova, what has been performed in the previous period and what investment projects are underway in the other sectors related to the energy sector? First of all, Chapter 27 definitely is one of the chapters that costs a lot of money and lots of investments will be required therein. Once you take it together with the other sectors, parts of Cluster 4, transport, energy and trans-European networks, then we are talking about investments, planned investments moving around 1,000 euro per capita, which means we are talking about huge capital investments. Before I move on, I wish to follow up on to the Minister Bekteshi's comments in the message that everybody should become part of the process, especially during public debates and during identifying legislation and strategic documents, because we oftentimes have the general public's reaction later on once these laws are adopted and strategic documents are adopted. And we do need everybody in the drafting and enactment of these documents. The Ministry of Environment in recent years has become very transparent, especially with regard to this. We are continuously calling everybody that needs to be part of the process, not to wait for it to happen in the end or post the process, but to be actively involved in the entire process. When we talk about environmental investments related to the other sectors, we should not be afraid of the fact that we indeed should implement some investments that are rather costly, because they will definitely help us to develop the country either through the road infrastructure, digitalization, renewable energy sources, and natural resources protection. What is important, and I wish to underline, and during the first panel it was mentioned by the Deputy Prime Ministers and the Minister of Finance, is that the perspective offered by the European path will help us implement the EU acquis, harmonize with it and implement it, because none of the countries, including most of the EU member states, maybe not the first ones, but the ones that have become members in the last 10 to 15 years did not manage to implement the environmental investments only through national funds, but with the great assistance from the EU funds. The Deputy Prime Minister of Economic Affairs mentioned EPA. Yes, that is one of the instruments we are using right now and implementing in most part, especially in terms of water management and waste management, nature protection and air protection. However, once again, I'll repeat today that the EU funds, once they're open, once we open the negotiation framework and when we become an EU member state, will be multifold higher and help the country in its development. If we're talking about what has been specifically done, I'm very sorry to say that the ministry is seriously struggling in the years back to establish an integrated EU system for waste management. But I think that in the last 2 years, finally, and the period ahead of us, we are following a good path. We are working in 7 out of 8 regions in the country, and it will help us establish, first of all, the primary infrastructure and then to aim at reducing the waste quantities deposited through their selection and reuse. When we're talking about water resources, there we have some complex processes in place. First of all, the management at the level of a river basin and then collection of wastewaters. Citizens usually say that the construction of systems is rather costly and then we need to pay for the maintenance of those systems. But I would reverse it. We would all have to pay much more for our health if we didn't invest now in the environment and didn't pay for the services for good waste management, cleaner waters through their collection and treatment, and invest all of us together in air protection, because it's not only the state that should invest in this area. Certainly, it should not be pardoned, but municipalities should become proactive as well, citizens including. I'm very sorry, oftentimes the ones coming from outside are saying you have a wonderful country that has very nice natural values and lots of nice places to visit, but you have waste in every single corner of our country, which presents a picture of all of us. Nobody should be pardoned. We need to give it a serious thought and be more responsible for the environment. Everybody, starting from the state to the citizen, every single citizen, and not stopping our ambitions. There are ambitious scenarios in place in all segments, especially in the economic sectors. And when we are implementing those ambitions, we should not forget about the environment. When it comes to waste management, I would follow up on to you that biogas power plants are an excellent way to handle the organic waste. As a part of a journalist team, I visited the biogas power plant in Saramzalino, which is a wonderful example of circular economy, where the organic waste is collected from the entire area, it's processed, and then fertilizer is produced, and then it is transformed. The agricultural land is transformed into a higher category of land. So it is connection of waste management and energy. Yes, you very nicely reminded me. Circular economy is something that we should give a serious thought, thus reducing the waste quantities. And there are a number of biogas power plants in place right now, which are one of the possibilities for the environment protection. With a system of such biogas power plant, the country can fully resolve the issue with organic waste. I have to mention one more thing. We oftentimes discuss this topic, and it's very difficult for the farmers to embrace this concept. We need to work a bit more there to raise public awareness, because when you have in the EU member states when you generate waste, you need to pay for depositing of the waste, and after that to be processed. We are a bit lagging behind in this area, and healthy environment is definitely costly. So, Mr. Randonov, one of the key issues in terms of energy transition is what is called just energy transition that will take care of the existing employees. What is required to make this transition without major social stressors? In ESM, we know that there is a high number of employees who are staff there related to some traditional technologies of power generation. Precisely, thank you for the question. There is a global debate and also conclusions that this transition is going to be costly, yes, but there is another interesting conclusion that if you are late with it, it's going to be even costlier. So we are usually not so efficient and we are lagging behind. And what we need to change first is to introduce certain activities and open and speak transparently about that. We have good conditions to do that. Why? Because unlike other countries in the region, we do not have coal in our country. And this coal, the reserves are for the coming 7 to 10 years only. If we go back to the energy development strategy in 2010, it was specified that the first Bitola block will be turned off in 2024. In 2010, 2024 was far away, but here we are in 2024. And the second block should be turned off in 7 years from now. We should have started back in 2010, maybe even earlier than that. And just transition, in our country, the word transition wakes negative feelings among the citizens precisely for the privatization in the last 30 years, because it has never been completed in the interest of citizens and arouses negative feelings. And I think that this word, even in the EU, just transition should include everybody, not only ESM, to make this transition. Everybody should take part in this transition. There are many ways to do that. Precisely, this investment plan should be an indicator to everybody that everybody can use part of those funds to make the transition. If we connect them to the fact that through the last 10 to 15 years in the Ministry of Environment, there are energy and efficiency measures, installation of new thermal devices, new facades and more efficient facades and new windows. And in the last 2 years, there are subsidies to install a system for electricity generation, photovoltaic power plant, till you come to the fact that every household should be more independent on the network and have a decentralized system. And if you reduce your needs, you will be little dependent on the leaps of prices on the market. And I think that we need to enable these measures and activities to the citizens, such as the heating pumps, photovoltaic power plants, and ESM as a company can get involved there, because all the households in Macedonia do not have either the possibility or knowledge to have this investment, because this is unknown to them. This can be done by ESM to them through a new model, and ESM should be transformed into a modern company, because we do not have any more thermal power plants and hydropower plants and develop a production plan. Today we have an exchange and we have an intraday exchange. During the day we are able to sell and buy, and we need to be much more flexible. We need to be developing in this regard in the analysis area. On top of that, all the measures in the EU, subsidies have been most topical in the last 2-3 years. The goal is to target those subsidies to vulnerable groups of people. We need to develop in our legislation, in the new energy law as well, these aspects are touched upon, vulnerable groups, if in a way see the blocks. We keep saying the first and second block has no changes. Most of the vulnerable groups are in the first two blocks, and let us see in the future. I see ESM as a universal supplier for vulnerable groups. We need to divide the groups. The just means to help those who most need it. Now we are saying that group 4 can pay their bills themselves because they spend too much energy, maybe. So the first and the second group should be helped most, maybe the third one, but this should be the concept and the goal of just transition. Though we are talking about 3 billion euros, I think it's going to be much more because the renewable energy sources measures are covered there, not the gas power plants. In the distribution and transition network, I think it's going to amount up to 5 billion euro. And if we are following the EU trends, we need to consider new funding ways where citizens will be included. The minister said many photovoltaic power plants were installed in the last 2 or 3 years, and in the future it's going to be much more difficult due to technical restrictions. Not every citizen can invest and have a power plant built 100 kilowatts, 300, 500, and now through the Ministry of Finance, ESM can develop a concept of funding the new facilities in this manner, collecting the funds through the citizens, because we do have a serious capacity both in the citizens, banks and companies. All of us together should take part because everybody would buy stocks in ESM. ESM will raise funds to invest, and finally ESM will be the investor, but also the citizens, because citizens will wish for ESM to work better, to be able to get the dividend as a sustainable concept, which is at the end of the day building a sustainable energy sector where everybody is involved. And at the end of the day, this is just transition for the first time ever through these photovoltaic power plants, through the transition models that the ministry has introduced. Even simple citizens can build photovoltaic, simple households and ordinary people having a piece of land, having a photovoltaic power plant on their land. So just transition has already started, and normally it's going to have some limit. We are not close to that limit right now. However, through new investments in the network and new technologies, we need to create our road for the coming 15 to 20 years to manage that.
Victor inspired me, and I forgot something I have to mention. We're talking about transition and smart spending. There is a new trend in the environment and public utility companies. For example, those trading waters generate, well, consume a lot of energy, and that's where we started, and that's well how we should continue the treatment station. For example, in Cochin is a concept that was offered to us by the Swiss partners, and we accepted it. So that 30% of the energy required is produced by the treatment plant itself. So in future we have to go with as low cost or consumption of energy as possible. That is through generation of electricity by themselves. Yeah, there are many interesting aspects, and this participation of citizens that you mentioned should be considered. We all know how coal impacts the environment, but the Ministry of Environment is key in granting new permits. So how much capacity such as Chebren or the wind park, which is a German investment, a photovoltaic plant, which is a French investment, and do they meet the the environmental standards? I think we're almost out of time. I only have one last question to you regarding the energy efficiency as one of the ways to achieve the goals set. Oh, thank you. I will try to answer. Of course, they will need to be designed first and then built. And as the minister said, even in that stage of designing, we need to assess the environmental aspect and take into account the overall cycle of operation of this photovoltaic plant or wind park. And the strict, as you say, environmental standards should also be taken into consideration. We need to meet the EU directives requirements in the European financial institutions, and the other panelists before me also said that we have financial institutions present in the country for years supporting financial projects also in the area of renewable sources of energy, and each individual project should undergo the process of environmental impact. What is important here, if the financing entity is not the state but an international financial institution, we have to meet the requirements in their policies, because each of them has their own policies relating to the climate changes and environment. They have their own standards, and it is a good thing that the rule here is that the stricter of the standards should be followed. That is important for the project long term, but also for the future generation, because in this way we will be able to preserve the biodiversity and the quality of soil and waters and air. Whenever a project is initiated, an analysis is made of the difference between the requirements under the national legislation and the international standards, and it is important that the experts have to provide a proposal as to how to overcome these gaps in the environmental impact assessment study. Let me only mention something interesting that we've came across for the first time now as developers of such studies. In general, the difference or gaps are in the fact that the social aspects of the international standards are involved in an impact assessment study, and it's called, and it also involves social aspects. Unlike that, we also merely tackle the issue of social aspects, but we should talk about change of land use, engagement of labor, the local population, access to roads, water for the local population in the vicinity of the projects, and many other aspects. Just to cut it short, another difference is that, as at the beginning, as the minister said, the participation of the public, the financial institutions require that there is a plan of involvement of the stakeholders at the very beginning, and that these stakeholders be engaged, involved, and informed throughout all the stages, and given the opportunity to have their voices and concerns heard, because this will lead to introduction of efficient protection measures. In addition to the analysis of the impact of a project on the generation of greenhouse gas emissions or reduction of such gases or use of fossil fuels, such as in the case of the photovoltaics, that should also be a subject of analysis. But the financial institutions increasingly demand or require other analysis how a project, for instance, a photovoltaic power plant that will operate for 25 30 years, the way in which it will be exposed to the climate change events and what are the risks involved, such as floods, propagation, land erosion, and so on. In short, whether a project, for example, the photovoltaic power plant, would be exposed to any such risks throughout its operation, and that depends on the site itself, on past events, and the probability of such events occurring in the case of such projects. And once a report on climate change vulnerability risk assessment is done, the goal is to envisage in the very design stage measures reducing or minimizing risks of such events. And this is something I believe we need as a country, and all experts working both in line with the national legislation and the requirements of the international institutions in developing impact assessment studies. We need trainings in these areas in order to be able to better understand these requirements and act upon them, because we definitely live in a dynamic world. We need to be open to accepting new methods and techniques to develop a project that will be beneficial for all. The, this is very briefly on energy efficiency. There are much better experts on this subject than me, but the way I understand it is that we need to assess the level of environmental protection and do environmental audits, identify the largest energy consumers, and introduce measures specified to them. And SMEs, in the case of SMEs, there are available good soft loans with incentives and grants to improve the energy efficiency of their operation. Also support for the households. We had this program that would allow households to continue. So a good example, as you yourself mentioned, the state needs, first of all, to renovate its own facilities and ensure their isolation and improve their energy efficiency. And this will be followed by the households and companies. And very briefly on the environmental aspects of these energy plans with renewable energy sources. I've had the opportunity to visit Kojani Hellenic Petroleum. There has a huge photovoltaic power plant that is equal to almost one block of Rekbitola. Hellenic Petroleum, by the way, is Hellenic Energy now, and they made sure to leave corridors between the panel fields so that the animals living there can pass freely. Maybe these aspects that are the same invisible for the ordinary people, in case of such investments, these aspects are definitely taken into account. Yes, there are such examples. Yes, no, that's. Let me just convey a message at the end. We had the opportunity here to have the leaders of the region in our country, as well as representatives of our strategic partners, both from EU and US. Let me add with a statement that also adds to this topic. This government, the people that are making their contribution to this transition and increasing safety and minimizing dependency, creates these opportunities. European opportunities are something that can be felt by the citizens in their everyday life and work, and we as a state are faced in front of two options: the opportunities that are that exist, and the other option is which does not offer any specific opportunities but are vague. And knowing our citizens, I'm sure they will choose the better option that is better for the future generations. Thank you.
Со ова го завршувам.
We came to the end of our panel. I thank the participants and all of you. Thank you.
Благодариме за присуствие.
Thank you for your attendance. We will now go for a short 10-minute coffee break and go on with the third panel afterwards. Statements from the media will be given in